Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. But I want to talk about USC's 27-20 win over LSU. The line was 4 to 4.5. The late money came in on USC, and I'm not suspicious, but when I see late money moving toward a team, I always feel like, is there an injury report that's not out yet? So the late money came in on USC, and my two takeaways are, I've said this for years, the NFL doesn't need 3 preseason games, and the LSU-USC game is a prime example. So USC has no preseason, no inter-squad games like the NFL has. The players are much younger than the NFL. They have limitations on practice hours in college. And USC's offense is 3 top sophomore receivers, a quarterback that's never started a regular season game of note, Miller Moss, an offensive line with a left tackle, Elijah Page, is a freshman. Alani Noah, a right guard, was a freshman. It's an incredibly young offensive team. And they had a meticulous opening game in a high leverage situation against the top SEC program. You're telling me you need 3 NFL preseason games? I thought my first takeaway is how meticulous the game was offensively. 7.5 yards a play for USC, 24 first downs, only 6 penalties, no turnovers. These are 19-year-olds. That USC offense is freshmen, sophomores, very few upperclassmen. Monheim, the center, who's probably a top 3 center in college football, is their real experienced guy. He's moved up and down that offensive line. He was left tackle, very good at it. Would have been drafted second, third round as a left tackle. He may be the first center off the board this year, first or second in the NFL draft. Outside of him, it's kids. It's Mason Murphy at right tackle, who's been a finger crossed for years. He's going to finally, hopefully, develop. I thought he played very well. So I just thought it was incredible to ask a young, there were certainly more NFL talent, veteran seasoned NFL talent on the LSU side than the USC side. And for the Trojans to play that well speaks really well of Lincoln Riley. So I want to talk about that. I just roll my eyes at the clickbait crowd. Jim Harbaugh can't coach. I defended him for like 7 years at Michigan. Lincoln Riley's overrated. He's averaged 11 wins per season. But the one thing that is true is that he was handed a winning program at Oklahoma, and he'd never truly built one from the ground up at USC. And there's a lot of things that matter. It's not just your IQ. He's a very smart play designer and a play caller. And he can develop quarterbacks overnight. We've seen that like 5 different times. But can he build a staff? Can he build a culture? He didn't have to. He was handed one at Oklahoma. So the question's always been, can you really start from scratch after they got rid of Alex Grinch and the defensive guys? Can you start from scratch and build a defensive staff? Well, pass with flying colors. So, I will tell you this about D'Anton Lynn, the defensive coordinator. He is USC's top NFL prospect outside of their center. I had an NFL general manager tell me that USC will be fighting to keep him for the next 2 years. He's very, very highly thought of as a defensive mind. He did a great job for Chip Kelly at UCLA, and Lincoln Riley, to his credit, stole him. And they assembled. It's the first time since Pete Carroll, and this is not a shot at Clay Helton, Lane Kiffin, or Steve Sarkisian. The latter two, Sark and Kiffin, are excellent offensive minds and very high-end coaches. But this is the first time since Pete Carroll I feel like we have a staff with multiple all-stars, where we got a defensive coordinator who could be a head coach. We have a top head coach. We have sharp coordinators, position coaches. This is a real staff, and you saw it on display. Special teams were good. Defensive alignments. That's not a small thing. I thought I was kind of watching social media after USC won, and it was remarkable how many people mentioned how good the tackling was. A basic in football. Think about that. If you were building a house and you asked somebody, hey, do you know any construction people? And you said, yeah, I got these guys. They are so good hammering nails. They are the best guys at hammering nails. And you'd be like, well, that's just the basics. Can they? USC hasn't tackled well for a decade. I'm not joking. Social media, and they were right, was all over this. The tackling was exceptional. Secondary linebackers, exceptional. The alignment, the pre-snap stuff, the adjustments. They didn't get any cheap stuff. LSU didn't with Nussmeier, who's a very good quarterback, by the way. They didn't get cheap stuff over the top. LSU had to earn everything. Now, USC did not generate a great pass rush, but that was pretty predictable because USC's D-line is, Bear Alexander has a pro body, but I think he's been a big disappointment. I thought last year he played well, but there's real concerns in the program. NFL scouts are really looking at him in games like the LSU game or the Michigan game. Those will be huge games because the Trojans don't play USC and Oregon. So these Penn State games, Notre Dame games, Michigan games, LSU games are huge for Bear Alexander because he's going up against NFL bodies and NFL players, and he didn't do anything. He had one tackle in this game. Big concern for him. Thankfully, Brandon Shelby, who was a top recruit last year, defensive end, played a lot of snaps and played very well. He's an ascending player on that defensive front. Nate Clifton, Gavin Meyer, a transfer from Wyoming, played pretty well and had a very good fall camp. But LSU has more NFL players, and I thought USC looked like an extraordinarily well-coached team. Pre-snaps, they didn't have a ton of motion offensively. They kept it fairly simple. Again, you have limitations on how much you can practice, but they kept it fairly simple. They did not run the ball terribly well, but they ran it situationally well in the red zone. There were a couple big third downs in the game. They ran well, and they ran well near both end zones, of course, sealing it with that touchdown at the very end with 8 seconds left. But you don't have to run for 120 yards to have an effective run game. It comes down to third downs or fourth downs or red zone rushes for touchdowns. And I thought USC had a couple of moments that shined very bright for their offensive line, which again is going to be much better in 6 weeks than it is now. The other thing that I should be shocked by it, but I'm not, because this is what I've seen Lincoln Riley do now 4 or 5 times. So Miller Moss has played 2 games. What's remarkable in both the games, he threw in the holiday for 6 touchdowns and 372 yards. He threw for 378 yards against LSU. So a bowl team and a top 10 college football program. And in none of those games, neither one did he have a 100-yard receiver. Well, that is really important. That is telling you that Miller Moss is seeing the field. He is not reliant on any one receiver. That's a big thing. I can remember, and I like Lane Kiffin, but I can remember Robert Woods or Marquise Lee. It felt like they were the offense. There was one receiver getting the looks. They are spreading it around. Lake McCree, the tight end, had a really, really noticeably good game, and he was very much a part of the early game plan. It was as if USC went into the game a little concerned potentially with their youth on the offensive line and the pass rush of LSU. So they got their tight end very involved very quickly. They got one of the running backs involved very quickly in the pass game. I think then they started to get their feet under him, feel pretty good about it. Then Miller Moss, deeper drops, throwing the ball down the field multiple times. Big catch by Deuce Robinson, who was a high school tight end, baseball star, but now, he's a wideout for USC. So my big takeaways are Miller Moss and I met him years ago, not that he was thinking of transferring, but it was really tough. He was a high school star. He's been a great quarterback in Southern California forever. And he knew that Caleb Williams was dynamic, but you just sit there and you just wait for your turn. And I think he was really frustrated. And he and I had a brief conversation once. And I'm like, listen, dude, if you're ever going to stay at a program and sit, Lincoln Riley's a really guy and Caleb Williams is a really guy to sit behind. You're going to learn a lot. And I think you saw it. Same with Nussmeier, by the way. He could have transferred, didn't. He sat in his program and said, you know what? I'm gonna sit here with this program. Brian Kelly's had some good NFL quarterbacks, certainly made the NFL. Like, I'm gonna sit around with Brian Kelly. He knows what he's doing. And Miller Moss did that. I thought his accuracy was excellent. I thought he mixed the ball up all over the field. He's clearly seeing the field. He is not one-dimensional. He's not zoned in on specific receivers. And like a Jordan Love with the Packers, he's young and all his receivers are sophomores. Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson. I think Hudson may be a redshirt sophomore or sophomore. Lemon, I think, is a sophomore. So it's a young offense. It's not a young defense. It's not. A lot of those guys are gone next year. A lot of these transfers are seniors. Bear Alexander will be gone. Gavin Myers, Nate Clifton. A lot of these guys will be gone. I think overall, if you're a USC fan, it's not just about winning. It's not that. USC scored a lot of points with Lane, Sark, Clay, and Pete. But Pete's teams look different. The staffs were great. You always felt you had an advantage, like Belichick in his prime. You always felt like Andy Reid. You felt with Pete at USC, you had the better staff. They were worth a field goal. They would adjust better at halftime. They would come in, down the stretch, 2-minute drills. Did you notice the end of the half, 2-minute drill by USC, end of the game? So many times in that USC game, they were so intentional on these big drives. They had a complete game plan. They were a little conservative with play calling early. Don't blame them. Again, I think it all goes back to the offensive line and concerns up front about keeping Miller Moss upright. Once they got confident in that, they opened things up. And I thought, second quarter, middle second quarter on, I liked their play calling. I thought everything was intentional. Everything was smart. Everything had a purpose. It just wasn't random play calling. They were setting stuff up. And I think you have to be really happy. You can crap on LSU, but their next 4 games, LSU is going to roll through the next month, beating teams by 30. They face South Carolina, Nichols, UCLA, South Alabama. They don't face Georgia this year. They get Bama at home. So they have a fairly favorable SEC schedule. And Brian Kelly wins 10 games a year. They're going to win a bunch of games. That's a good football team. They made silly mistakes. They were immature. There was a taunting penalty, a headhunting penalty. They beat themselves at the end of the game. But that's football. USC had the better staff, the better game plan late. They were more efficient situationally, and they hit on a couple of big plays over the top. Boy, do they have good receivers. USC got dudes. I mean, they're all coming back, and they are young. And, going into this game, I didn't even think Hudson was going to start. And he made the 2 biggest catches of the football game. I thought he was like 3rd or 4th in their rotation. He was the star. So, in Branch, special teams needs to be noted. You get to a 12-team playoff, you're going to have attrition. You're not going to have full rosters. Some of these games are going to be won by special teams, blocked kicks, kick returns. Branches, there's nothing else like Branch in college football. It reminds me of when Deion Sanders played for Florida State, and they'd play those big rivalry games with Florida or Miami. And all the speed in the country felt like it was in those 3 programs. It was the Gators, it was the Noles, it was the Hurricanes. And, all the corners, receivers felt like 4-3 guys. And Deion was another level. Like he was another gear of speed. LSU's got world-class athletes. They wanted no part of him in open field situations. That kid it's just different. He's different. And his brother's a decent safety, but he doesn't look like anybody else on the field. He's got a different gear. So he's going to that kick return was so valuable. He had a couple of big plays underneath that he turned into big plays. Do not in a 12-team playoff, it's just like the NFL. Once you go to a playoff, attrition becomes part of it. You have to win multiple ways because you're going to be missing starters. You've got to win games by special teams. You've got to win games on, adjustments. There's going to be you're not going to get your best game in a playoff system. It's not one big bowl game where you have 3 weeks to prepare for it or a month to prepare for it. Week after week after week, you're playing really good teams. You have less prep time. These are young players. You're going to have to find multiple ways to win, and USC could win with special teams. I do think they will generate a better pass rush. LSU's got, I believe, top of my head, 3 multiple-year starters. I think both their tackles are Sunday players. So USC's got to feel great about it.